references to Germany also. I have no idea. I can't tell you. It's not a common name in Haiti either. So.
Nathalie Joachim. Okay, I got it.
You got it.
Just to start the show, I'm going to introduce the show and myself. Nate will introduce himself, and then I'll introduce you, and we'll start the conversation. All right?
Cool. Sounds good.
This is SoundNotion, the weekly podcast for new music and music news. I'm David McDonald.
I'm Nate Blyton.
And joining us this week is Nathalie Joachim, the newest member of Eight Blackbird, excellent new music ensemble based out of Chicago. She's the new flute player. So, Nathalie, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, I am very curious about what it's like to join Eight Blackbird at this point in Eight Blackbirdness. Right, because obviously I would imagine that you as a flute player and someone interested in this rep has heard of Eighth Blackbird before you joined them.
Yeah, once or twice.
Yeah. So what's that like to now be in the group?
It's wonderful. Let's start with that as a simple answer. It's really wonderful. I mean, I think I'm obviously filling some very big footsteps in terms of the flutists who have been members of this group before. Both Molly Barth and Tim Monroe are excellent flutists who brought a lot to this group, and I can only hope to continue that tradition. And it's a lot to sort of join a super group that's been around for most of my life, which is an interesting thing also to note.
Is there like a hazing of some kind?
There hasn't been anything too bad. No, I'm waiting. I'm not getting too cozy yet because you never know. I can get comfortable, and then next thing you know, the hazing begins. But so far, everybody's been really welcoming, and it's been really great. It's just like I'm hoping to like soak it all in, and been trying to take a lot of photos and remember all the moments because it's all going by really fast.
Do you feel like, you said that this group has been around for most of your life. Do you feel like really young, or do they feel really old talking to you about this stuff ever?
No, not at all.
I would.
Not at all. I don't think so.
Maybe you don't bring that up very much in rehearsal, but you guys have been together as long as I've been alive.
It doesn't. No, I don't bring it up often, and I think it's cool, but it's definitely, been an interesting thing to follow them as a fan for so long, and to now really feel like, there are some nerves involved with joining a group like this, but I have to say, like, the one thing that I felt even from my audition with them was just that, like, it feels very natural for me to be playing with them. I think that that's one thing that feels great about joining a new ensemble that maybe isn't always true, that feels really great. There's a synergy between us that has felt good from the first moment that I really first played with them during my audition, and that has only proven to have gotten stronger even in such a short amount of time. And that feels good, I think, in joining a chamber group.
Yeah, I would think that there would be the danger of having a lot of catching up.
Right.
For that kind of, not just musical stuff, but social stuff. I would feel like it's very easy to feel like an outsider, but it sounds like they're making you feel very welcome.
Yeah, they are. I mean, I think that, like, there's been a lot. The most catch-up has been just, like, learning piles of music that they're like, oh, we've just been rehearsing it. Oh, we already recorded this. Oh, okay. And I'm like, oh, God, I'm just trying to learn all these things. But, yeah,
because it's not like joining a wind quintet where the primary rep is stuff you would already know.
Right.
But this is a lot of brand new stuff that has not been around that long, and also a lot of it, I would imagine, is commissions of theirs, and so it's stuff that you wouldn't have really even had the opportunity to play before.
Exactly. That's definitely a thing, and I think in particular with Handeye this season, it's like the sort of coming together of Sleeping Giant and Eight Blackbird was sort of serendipitous in that there are 6 members of Eight Blackbird and also 6 members of Sleeping Giant, and one of the things that's really special about all of the pieces is that they really wrote the pieces with each individual player in mind. I think I'm lucked out in that Tim and I sort of, I guess, may have had things that we love doing on our instrument that are similar.
Great.
So, I kind of lucked out with the movement in which the flute is sort of the core instrument, but I think it's an interesting thing to step into, because that piece in particular is a piece that was very much written for not just this ensemble, but for these people, and so not having been one of those people through that process has been an interesting thing to come around to, but I think it's really wonderful, but it is different than any, like, joining an orchestra or joining a more standard ensemble where you might have a lot of the repertoire under your belt. I mean, I had none of this repertoire under my belt before getting here, so it feels a little different.
Yeah, I imagine there's a lot of gripping the seat pretty tight for the first couple of weeks. I think that pretty accurately describes my first few weeks here. There was a lot of sweating and chair gripping for sure. But you mentioned Handeye. I want to talk about that. So this is a long evening length work that it's a collaboration among the members of Sleeping Giant, which is kind of like a composer band kind of group. I don't know how else to describe them. But there's some really talented composers in that group. So what is the process of, I guess now that the piece was probably mostly written by the time you joined Eighth Blackbird, what is the process like working with not just an individual composer but with a group of composers?
I mean, to me, it's pretty brilliant, the result, like getting to see the end result of it, because, as you guys know, it's like composing is like a highly individual, like internalized thing, and so for the
you can say lonely, antisocial.
No, I don't think you're antisocial. I think that, like, it's just an individual process. But to me, being able to play the whole program all the way through, it's amazing what they've done, because you would while each piece really does have its sort of personalized stamp of each composer, it sits so well as an evening length production, even like with or without intermission, but listening all the way through, they really did a great job of sort of like connecting the pieces in a way that there's really a lot of just, I don't know, there's not a lot of overlap, not a ton of overlap in the material really, but I just feel like they did a great job of like making it all feel like one piece that's in several movements, and so I don't know how they did that. I don't know how, like, what magical thing came to be to really make that happen. And maybe it's, I know that there were a lot of workshops and a lot of discussions between both the ensemble and all of the composers in developing the pieces. And maybe that's reflected in this end result. But it really is such a seamless evening of music that feels really good. They're just 6 highly individual pieces that feel really good together. And I think that's been the reaction of audiences so far, and that's really, to me, as a performer of this and all this music being new to me, it feels really, really good as a piece in its entirety, really.
That's interesting. So, working with these 6 pieces, do you find yourself and with the group, like, do you try to work on each piece on its own, or do you prioritize like making the arc with all of them? Or I guess maybe a little bit of both, or?
A little bit of both. I think definitely when I first started, it was about like tackling each one. They all have their complexities, and so I think that was definitely part of it. But I think now, as we've been presenting the program more and more, sort of leading up to the Carnegie debut, which is going to be a fully staged version with visuals by Deborah Johnson and some very interesting staging for the ensemble, etc. I think now that we've been presenting it at other venues leading up to that, it does have, it evolves in a way where we're like, maybe we should do this half without any pauses between the pieces this show and see how that feels. Maybe we will stop between these pieces today and see how that feels, or what that feels like to the audience, to try to tie them together as one. And I think that process is evolving for us. It changes with each show, and like in terms of how we, like if we're presenting them as 6 individual pieces versus like 6 pieces that connect with one another. And so we have been experimenting as we've been on tour with taking breaks here and there or not taking breaks and hoping that the audience kind of goes with us. And it's been interesting to see how that works for the audience, especially because we do intend, you know, like obviously we're working up to figure out what will be best for what happens at Carnegie, you know.
That seems like a really interesting luxury, actually, to be able to workshop a new piece with an audience that many times, to not only be bringing this new piece to life for the first time, but to be able to perform it in quick succession for so many different audiences and try things in performance. Normally we kind of get to try a few things in rehearsals and workshop-y kinds of situations, but with an audience to see how audiences react to those different things, I would think is something that not a lot of people get to do. What's that like?
I mean, I have to say, in a way, this season is outside of Handeye is very interesting for exactly that reason, because of our NCA residency. I mean, all of our everything is happening in front of an audience, essentially. And so, I mean, just to like tell you a little bit more about the NCA residency, we are basically a living installation here at the. I'm saying here because I'm actually at the museum right now.
Nice.
So we're a living installation here this season at the MCA, which essentially means that all of our rehearsals that happen when we're at home here in Chicago happen at the MCA in our studio gallery here, and they're completely open to the public. So any patron who comes to the museum can come by and sit in on a rehearsal, ask us questions, hear a lot of these works in progress, and a lot of people, what we have found that this has been really interesting so far, is that a lot of people come back very regularly, and I think for those people, it will be interesting to see how all of these pieces grow through our residency here at the MCA, and while we're on tour, like how the pieces will evolve as we are performing them for people and developing them in rehearsal here at the MCA. So I think that's pretty. It's just an interesting thing that you mentioned that, because for me, that's so far my only experience with Eight Blackbird is like kind of always getting this kind of instant feedback from audiences.
Yeah, we always rehearse in front of an audience.
Why would you do it any other way? Yeah.
So it's interesting. It's a funny process. You'd be surprised. Some people are pretty reserved about like just coming in and sitting quietly in a corner and just listening and not asking too many questions. Some people are very forward with asking questions and sort of jump right in the middle of rehearsal.
I feel like I would be really shy. Like I've been in rehearsal. I know like you got other things to worry about. Yeah. It's nice enough for you to let people in the room. Like that would seem to be really intimidating. But what have those interactions with people been like? We've talked on the show a lot about, you know, the relationship of new music and new musicians to audiences. What is that like, the interaction with these people? What sorts of questions are they asking? What sorts of things are you talking about with them?
Right. I think what's very interesting about being here is that we don't get, like, I mean, sort of like you were saying, like you are a musician, so you understand this rehearsal process, and so you might feel like some sort of reservation about walking in and just beginning to ask us questions. And I think
you're working.
Right. And I think that like the average museum goer is not necessarily the average concert goer, you know? And I think especially with museums being a sort of like look but don't touch kind of a place, but then all of a sudden being invited into this process where you're very much like, it's like, please come be a part of this. I think people are much more open than they would be, or than what you would expect from a typical music crowd, for example. So the interactions have ranged from, like I said, some people being sort of quiet and not really interacting at all, but some people who are non-musicians at all asking super inquisitive questions and insightful questions that are really awesome to see. And I think we've had everything from toddlers to the elderly come through, and everything in between. And I think it's been nice to see them be so mindful about listening and really asking questions that, to me, have been surprising from people who haven't studied music or don't really have a musical background. And I think it's great to be engaging audiences in that way, to invite them to listen in a different way and to invite them to be a part of this sort of hidden process, right? This always happens behind closed doors. And so it's been really fun, actually.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. It's a thing that I sometimes with young composition students have to talk about. This is not like a magical thing. It's just working on stuff. And I think maybe the general public feels that way about a lot of the music making process, is that it's this, whiz bang hocus pocus thing,
right.
But really it's just this really slow and gradual and kind of tedious process
right.
over a long time. I'm curious, can you give us any examples of a conversation or a question that stick out from the conversations you've had?
Right. So we have had, so there have been some interesting things so we have like a guest book set out in the gallery, so that if we are in the middle of rehearsal and people don't feel open to talking to us, they can leave us messages or questions in the guest book. A lot of them end up being in other languages, which is funny. We've been doing a lot of Google translating to see people are like, oh, look, somebody left us a message in Japanese. I don't know what that means. And so I think it's been interesting to hear about what they hear when they hear these pieces a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think there's a student who keeps coming by. He's been by a few times, and he sort of created this visual representation of improvisatory music, which we had been talking about at one point, and that was really interesting because he sort of ended up emailing us this visual representation of how the music translated to him visually. That was a really interesting person to come by, and it was a fun thing to receive from an onlooker. We've had a lot of on family days, for example, we'll have toddlers who just come in and are dancing, and that's always really fun too.
Right.
They're not necessarily questions, but just to see them excited by the music, I think is really, really fun. And also interacting a lot with the Childhood Tree exhibit. Right now we've got our studio gallery is one space, and then another space, which is more of an open forum, has an installation of John Cage's Childhood Tree. And so that's an invitation for people to come and make sound with all natural materials. And so that's been really cool. It's been an interesting backdrop also throughout our rehearsals to sort of hear this music making happening just outside.
Did you ever go over and join the Cage performance?
We haven't, actually. We haven't done that, but it's not a bad idea.
I think that would be fun.
We're here until June, so you never know. That
Surely on a coffee break or something, a little jam session next door.
And we've also got a lot of really great guests coming this season also. We already did one educational event with David T. Little, who we're going to be premiering a work of his at the Kennedy Center in March called Ghostlight. And so we did our first readings of the piece and a public workshop of that here. And I think the people who were present for that really got a lot of that, because I think it's not often.
So the workshop was open with the composer. Ooh, yeah. That's really cool. I would go see that.
Exactly. So that's I think a great part of the process for people to hear us playing his work in process and to see how the piece even evolved in the few days that he was here with us. That part of the composer's life that is taking it from the page and having it come to life with performers, I think is a really special part of the process that nobody ever gets to experience, really.
Yeah.
So that was, I think, very awesome for a lot of people. And so we've got a lot more guests coming throughout the season, and everybody can find out about those on the MCA's website and also Eight Blackbird's website.
I think it's a really cool thing for people that are in the visual arts museum kind of community, because I think it's relatively easy to look at an object and imagine somebody making the object, right?
Right.
When you look at a sculpture, you can imagine somebody putting those pieces together, or sculpting the clay, or bending the sheet metal, or whatever, to create the thing. But I think it's much harder for non-musicians to imagine what it's like to create notes on a page, which is, you know, inherently not very interesting. But like, it doesn't seem to be as much structure to that as there is to making an object. And it's great that the people that are coming to a museum who are used to seeing that kind of thing get to see what that process is like.
Right.
I would imagine. Did you have more people to see what was going on with David Little than for other things?
We had a lot of people show up for that evening's event, and I think that was really great. And the questions that were a wide range too, sort of like people being able to hear the influence of, like, David T. Little has actually a really interesting connection to, like, heavy metal music, and some of that, you hear qualities of that in this new piece, Ghostlight, that he's writing. And so to hear people pick up on that, to hear him as, like, part of his process say, I think that sound is almost where I want it to be. I think you're playing it sort of, you know, the way that I have put it in front of you, but I, as a composer, am now going to go back and develop it or change it in a way that, like, it's almost there, but it's not there yet. So let me, like, continue to have this part of the piece evolve. Like, to be able to hear that is the thing that happens, I think was really great for the audience. And we had a lot of people come through, and a lot of the questions were really interesting, and I think most of the feedback was just that, like, most people don't even know that that's a part of the process at all. And so I think it was interesting for them to be able to get a sort of microscopic view of it, which feels really good to be able to offer them a new experience and a new opportunity to do that.
That's so good.
Yeah.
So the audience, and so I guess you've got all these different audiences. They get to see the composer go through the creative and revision process, and your different audiences that you play for get to see things be a little bit differently. If if they get to see two different shows in the same run or something.
Right.
And I was wondering, for you personally as a flute player, have you found playing with this new group and playing with these different contexts, has it changed anything in the way that you approach the flute specifically, or like in your own playing?
I think that definitely, I mean, the amount of communication that has to happen in a chamber ensemble like Eight Blackbird is very different than a standard woodwind quintet, let's say. That's something flutists do a lot. So I think we play some seriously complex music that most ensembles would opt to have a conductor for. Yeah. And we are, of course, conductorless. And so to me, like, really learning the unspoken language of communication that's required, like, it's a complex language of, you know what I mean, to really communicate with each other in a way that serves the music and helps us all really work together and stay together, I think has changed me as a player for sure. Especially when you're doing something like that with a brand new group of people. I mean, they have, for the most part, except for Yvonne, they've all been, like, working together for 20 years, you know. So it's that language is highly developed for them, and so for me, that was, like, I would say, the first thing that I really needed to change about my playing. That's different. It's just, like, it's so different than relying on a conductor to just help you get through. And it requires you to know everyone's parts so much more and to communicate with them so much more clearly, musically and verbally, as we're working through the pieces. So I think that's changed about my playing for the better, for sure.
That's wild.
So I would imagine the Eighth Blackbird experience is a rather all-encompassing one. I'm curious though if you've had the opportunity to, like, go back and play with some of the people that you had been playing with before you joined, and if they have, like, noticed anything different about you're
I
playing?
wonder. So I'm still playing in my duo, which is called Flute Ronix, and I think that I'm interested. I am interested. I would be interested to know my duo partner's answer to that question. I think for me, it will definitely inform how I play any other piece of music. I just feel very much more like in tune with the people around me playing now. In a way, it's like I have like spidey sense or something. You know what I mean? And I think I think that will change. So I'd be interested to know and can report back to you later when more of that is happening.
Brilliant.
I would think that it would be a really interesting thing because I'm sure, like you said, that like doing this is requiring you to think about the music that you play in a really different way.
Right. Right.
Even if it's really not changing cognitively what you're doing, like just or changing like physically what you're doing on the instrument, the way you think about it, I would think would be different when you return to something else after the experience.
Definitely, and I think like being an instrumentalist is also a highly insular thing. Like we spent most of our lives like alone in a room doing the thing that we do and learning how to perfect this like crazy like okay, I'm gonna just press these buttons and make it sound really great, And I think that like the way in which, of course, you start to have obviously experiences where you're performing with everyone else, but you're still very attached to how you're doing this thing, like how I'm playing the flute is something that you still are hyper attached to. And I think when you join a group like Eight Blackbird, you have to really pay attention to how everyone's doing the thing that they do, which I think is maybe different than other chamber experiences. And I think just makes you a more mindful player in a lot of ways. So I think there's a lot of merit in that thought for sure.
Mm-hmm. And maybe that has to do like even just on a basic level with the new music thing, like we're playing older music where we've heard all these recordings, we've heard like tried it in different ways with people. There's a lot of things that maybe don't need to be so or communicated with such detail because everybody kind of knows already,
right?
Like how to do Mozart or whatever.
Right,
like,
right.
Yeah.
I think and of course, obviously, I think the memorizing music makes it that much more of a palpable experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so we are, of course, memorizing some pretty big portions of Handeye, and I think that has already, for me, like having just learned some of the pieces and then memorizing them and playing them and memorizing them together as a group and seeing how that even changes the communication brings that level much, like, I don't know, it just sort of like deepens the connection between all of us. Yeah. And I think that's a really strong thing that translates pretty palpably in performance.
Cool. And so are you doing all of the music memorized, or is that just kind of a rehearsal thing?
Not all of it memorized. We will do we will do large chunks of it. I'd say at least a third of it, maybe between a third and a half of the program will be memorized. And there's, like I said, there's going to be a lot of interesting staging as well. So that's not just for practice. It's definitely also for preparing for performance.
Excellent.
Mm-hmm.
So is it memorized just for the staging, or is it memorized for musical reasons?
I think both. I think really both. I think it's such a benefit to be able to memorize music when you can. That's something that I felt before coming to Eight Blackbird with Flute Ronix. We perform just about everything from memory, and it just changes the way you listen. And so I'm really glad that that's a part of what Eight Blackbird has been doing for all of these years also. And I think it's like, it obviously makes it convenient for staging because then we can move around. But I think that it's certainly for musical reasons as well.
Excellent. So you've mentioned the duo that you have, Flute Ronix, a couple times. It's you and Allison Loggins Hall, I read.
That's right.
Yeah, I haven't gotten to listen to any of the project. Can you talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, it's a duo for two flutes, electronics. We also have a live drummer, Joe Blacks, and I also do vocals in the group, and we mostly write all of our own music. We do some covers. We have commissioned some pieces, and Eight Blackbird was very amazing in wanting me to still be able to continue to be a part of that group once I joined Eight Blackbird, and so we've been transitioning there's a lot to take on with Eight Blackbird.
Yeah, your schedule is a little different, I bet.
Yeah, so we have been transitioning, but I think that it was something that made me that much more appealing as a candidate for this job, and I feel really great about still being able to do both, and they feed such different sides of me that I feel pretty lucky, I have to say. I sort of am like I won the flute lottery or something. I feel really good about being able to do both things. So
they're really interesting, kind of complementary projects, and I think like Flute Ronix and Eighth Blackbird both kind of in some way straddle the divide between art music and popular music, and Flute Ronix maybe leans a little bit more on the popular side, and Eighth Blackbird leans a little bit more on the classical side. It's an interesting thing to be a part of both of those groups.
Totally, and I feel like super well balanced, very well rounded as a flutist, very well challenged by both projects. So yeah, I feel pretty lucky.
I can't imagine that there are many other people, if any other people, that are playing such different kinds of music at such a high level. It's got to be. I would imagine that's quite a challenge to balance those two things. But
yeah, it's a challenge, but a beautiful one that is very welcome to me. So my flute playing only benefits from all of it. So that's really great. I think just feeling balanced in that way makes each style informs the other and makes me a stronger player, honestly, all around. So I'm really grateful for the challenge.
There's an interesting thing about, you mentioned that you do vocals in Flute Ronix, and one of the things that strikes me the few times that I've had the opportunity to hear Eighth Blackbird live is that they have a very popular music informed stage presence even when they're playing Schoenberg, and it strikes me that your background doing vocals in particular in Flute Ronix probably lends itself to blending really well with just the way Eighth Blackbird interacts with one another and their demeanor on stage.
For sure. I think what's awesome about Eighth Blackbird in performance is that we are really inviting to audiences in a way that, like, it's like classical music has such the reputation of having this sort of barrier between the performer and the audience, and Eighth Blackbird has like nothing to do with that barrier between performer and audience, especially this year, as we know, as we talked about. But I think that like that's really strong, and in a way, I think more than me doing vocals with Flute Ronix or not, or whatever. I think it just having experience in expressing yourself with an audience in a non-classical way is very informative to classical performance, like traditional classical performance. And I think, to me, obviously I'm a little biased, but I think like Eighth Blackbird really exemplifies that in the classical music community. And so I feel strong to be able to continue to bring that skill and that quality of my performance skill set to the group, because I do think it's a very sort of crucial component of what they do. It's just like we as an ensemble of Eighth Blackbird are just not about making sure that the audience is there and we're here. I think so much of being a part of the ensemble is recognizing that like we are also people on stage. I think like, for instance, maybe this is a more clear way to explain it. It's like when you are generally, let's say you're going to sit on stage and play a Brahms symphony, which is going to be totally beautiful and amazing, that experience, in a lot of ways, doesn't feel like it's about, or you're trained in a lot of ways to not feel like that experience is about you as a player, but it's about you fulfilling what Brahms wanted to happen, right? So it very much like puts the composer at the center of that and removes the personality and like the individuality of the player from the process. And I think Eight Blackbird is totally the opposite, in that we work really closely with composers all the time, and so of course it is about bringing the composer's vision to life, but also about understanding that like we are people on stage. Our personalities do come through our playing and through just our being on stage, and so we embrace that as an ensemble, and that is a very like popular music kind of feeling, right? That is, there is something that's very like, you're going to go see the Rolling Stones, like you're definitely going to get some of Mick Jagger's personality, right? Like you're going to feel Keith Richards for who he is. And I think for Eight Blackbird, you're experiencing the music, but you're also experiencing us as players. And so I think that's right on. I think that that's a totally fair like statement about who we are as an ensemble.
I like the way you put that with Brahms, because it's funny because the dead composers like Brahms are the ones who aren't going to be able to say anything. You know, like the living composer, if he or she really doesn't like the thing that you did, they can tell you, right? But Brahms is gonna. I won't tell Brahms.
Like, I mean, I think it is a little weird that we like even pretend to know what Brahms wanted. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what he wanted. I hope I'm doing it right. It's funny about this person that I don't know at all. But like, yeah, I mean, I think that's like, I think it is a funny thing, and definitely one of the more awesome parts about how Eight Blackbird works, and that we get to work so closely with the composers, because they get to know us as people too, and I think that's really important and totally informs how they continue to write for this ensemble.
Yeah.
And that again plays right into your residency of people seeing you guys work as people and just being professionals, you know, expressing yourselves in all the different ways that people express themselves to one another. I think that's really cool, and maybe something that we as music as a field in general needs to do a better job of is reminding everyone that, you know, the people on stage are regular people, and the people writing the notes that the people on stage are playing are regular people, and they know that you are regular people, and we're all just in this room together having this cool evening experience.
Right, exactly right. And you know what? I also think it's like a great part of the process for people to see, especially, you know, it's like when we go to schools and give talks to students who are thinking about starting ensembles or composers who are thinking about working with ensembles. I think one of the things that consistently comes up is that like playing the music is actually one of the easier parts of what we do. Like part of it is also like being with each other. Like we're all basically in a relationship with one another, you know what I mean? A very serious one. And like knowing how to do that successfully. I mean, I think Eight Blackbird's been around longer than probably most marriages. So,
right, and they probably spend more time together than most married people.
Right.
So I think it's one of those things where, you know, it's good for people to see that as part of the process, that like we, you know, there are ups and downs to this, and there are good days and there are bad days, and there are days we feel great about our playing, and there are days we don't feel great about our playing, and that's all part of the process, and going through that together is also a really big part of the process.
You know, that's something you touched on something that I meant to ask about earlier when we were talking more directly about the residency. What is it like when you are not feeling great about your playing and you're doing it in public?
I mean, it's tough. I think it's difficult, definitely. I think it also helps you as a performer to embrace that side of you, you know what I mean? I think we work so hard from the very first moment that, you know, it's like there are little kids who are 4 who are playing recitals. It's like, it's all about like getting in front of people and how you're supposed to look and what you're supposed to be like. And I think that embracing those bad days that we are used to having in a practice room on our own or in a rehearsal studio on our own is okay for people to see and okay for you to feel those feelings. Like, that's not a thing that should be hidden, and I think it's actually like a really healthy, there's like something that's very healthy about that process, like psychologically. It's just that like these are things that are a part of you too, and your playing is influenced by the good and the bad that come with this job, you know? And so I think I think it's strange, but it's also a telling thing for us and a heartfelt part of the process too, to like love that part of yourself too, instead of the part of yourself that's always stage ready, you know?
That's a beautiful answer. One thing that strikes me is that Eighth Blackbird's audience actually probably understands that as well a lot better than a lot of other audiences, and I don't know what it is about the Eighth Blackbird marketing materials that brings in people that kind of get that, but I feel like a lot of classical audiences would feel a little uncomfortable with that level of familiarity. You know?
Right. I mean, I think classical music in particular is like often presented in this like pretty little package, and I think more and more that's changing with lots of different ensembles. But again, I do think Eight Blackbird does a really good job of inviting people to engage with us in performance, and now at the NCA in rehearsal as well. And I think that's maybe. I think that's great that it's the perception that's built into our audience anyway. You know what I mean? I think that's really a strong thing. Like, yay, go Eight Blackbird fans for being awesome and being a part of that. Because I think that's you know, that classical music needs a little shaken up. You know what I mean? I think that's really a strong part about what we're doing in terms of presenting contemporary classical music.
Yeah, and I think it's something that chamber music does particularly well. Because you really are 6 individuals on stage,
right,
performing chamber music in a way that you can't be, 68 individuals on stage in an orchestra. Yeah. Right? There's no other way to see 80 people wearing concert black other than a mass of people wearing concert black.
Right. Exactly right.
There's no personality in that particular setting the way there is in. So I wonder, well, man, that's a big problem that we as a community around the world needs to figure out how to solve, is how to kind of scale that up to orchestra and band and choir.
Doing it. I think that it's happening. The revolution has started. So I think that's happening more and more. I feel positive about the trajectory of classical music in general right now, for sure.
Yeah, we do too. That's why we make this podcast.
Exactly.
Yay! I'm glad I did it. I'm also glad that you guys had Dan Trueman on. He's so awesome. And
man, he was so fun, and we had another like 10 minutes with him after the show. He was talking about his fiddle in the back.
Oh my God, that beautiful! Did you got to see it?
It was on the wall behind him, and he was telling us that it is a constant distraction to him because it's on the wall in his office when he's trying to write, and what he really would rather be doing is just playing the fiddle.
Yeah.
So beautiful. I was completely enchanted by it myself the first time that I saw it. It sounds beautiful. I think it's called a Hardanger fiddle, and I think it's only just a small handful of them exist in the world at all. Like maybe Dan's was like the 3rd or 4th to ever exist.
Yeah.
It's a traditional Norwegian instrument, and it has like sympathetic strings.
Right. I know. And they're so cool. And beautiful. It sounds amazing.
And they're beautiful instruments. Like they're super intricate carvings all over them. It's so cool.
So we're working with Dan, and he'll be here at the MCA with us in December.
Really?
We're working with him on a project called Oligone, and a singer.
That is a rehearsal that I need to see. I bet Dan Trueman in rehearsal in front of an audience with Eighth Blackbird is quite a show. If you're in Chicago, check it out.
Yes, it's going to be really great. Dan will be here, and he'll be here also with Irla O'Leonard, who's an amazing singer from Ireland. He's part of a band called The Gloaming. And so Irla will be singing on the project also. But that actually, oddly enough, was my first real experience with Eight Blackbird, was coming out to Chicago to begin to workshop Oligone at Eight Blackbird's studio here in Chicago before we were at the museum, and so that happened back in June, and was it June? Must have been June. But yeah, so that happened then, and it was so great, and the music sounds so amazing, and I cannot wait to have Dan back here in December to hear more of it, and for the public to get to hear a lot of it, all of it, some of it for the first time ever. So. That'll be really awesome. So he'll be back here. I'm trying to think of who else is coming. Bryce Dessner is going to come back with David T. Little later on this season here at the MCA, and that'll be really great. I so far have gotten to play, we started our conversation with this, I so far have gotten to play Bryce Dessner's Murder Ballads.
Oh, yeah.
Sweet.
We talked about it a little before the show that, like, right as you were joining the group, they released an album that you're not on, and now, and so I'm sure you've just had to, like, and of course, as anybody who's recorded an album knows, the process of recording the album makes you a total expert on all of that music.
Exactly.
And so I'm sure all of those guys are like, oh my gosh, we have to play this thing again. And you're like, holy crap, I have to play this thing today.
It's funny because I always find that recording makes you, like, you always want to re-record after you've recorded, almost, because you're like, now I know this piece so well that if I got to do it again, it would be that much better even.
Right.
But the album turned out so well. Filament has done, like, it's just beautiful. If I weren't a part of Eight Blackbird, I would totally be saying that. I didn't plan it, so I don't have any anything in this game at all. I totally just, like, love the album. I think Bryce did such a great job with Murder Ballads. It's some really beautiful writing, and so I have been happy to play that. And Nico's piece on the album is just gorgeous as well. And of course, the glass is amazing, and that a lot of it, most of it, was actually recorded here at the MCA.
Really? It's a live recording, right?
Right. So, which makes it that much more impressive to listen to, because you're like, what? I can't even believe this happened in real life. So it's really great, and it's so funny. So in a lot of ways, I feel very, like, connected to the album, because Nico and I actually went to Juilliard together. So I've known Nico for a while now, and have always thought that his music was beautiful and amazing. It kind of always has been. He's always been awesome. Some people are just born awesome. He's one of them. And Bryce actually is, like, a very big reason why I am even here with Eight Blackbird, because Bryce Dessner is the one who even recommended me to Eight Blackbird as an option to be a flutist. So I'm just, like, pumped that all of that came, like, basically all of my connections to Eight Blackbird came into fruition on Filament, and that it sounds awesome and that people really should listen to it. I think it's rare these days that people listen to an album all the way through, and Filament really takes you on a journey. So it's great to listen to it fragmented as well, but I think the journey from beginning to end feels really strong. In a way that albums aren't totally put together anymore. You know, like, I think when people put together albums, it's rare these days because of, like, singles being downloaded and whatever, that people ever really think even. Like, so many people, I'm guilty of it myself. I'm constantly, like, shuffling through my iTunes music. I'm, like, always on shuffle mode, which is really bad. But I will say it feels so good. And even better is that we're putting the album out on LP shortly, so that gives you more reason to listen to it, to give it a through listen. You can't really skip around on LPs the way you can on CDs.
Right.
So those will be coming out soon, but the album just came out in the beginning of September, and is just awesome. It's just awesome. And again, we all know I didn't play on it, so I'm not just saying that. It really is so good. So we'll be playing a lot of that music coming up soon, actually in a few weeks in Texas, we're going to be playing some of the murder ballads, and Bryce is going to join us down there too. But he'll be here at the MCA, I believe, in March. Somebody might want to fact check that, but I think it's in March. He'll be back, and we'll be performing that here also at the MCA as well. So.
Yes, I second the recommendation for the album. It is some just stellar performances of some killer rep, and I'm not just saying that to be nice because Nathalie didn't play on it.
Yeah.
It's really cool, really cool stuff.
Yeah.
I was actually just listening to the Bryce Dessner recording that's on there with one of my students a couple weeks ago, blowing his mind. So.
Yeah,
really
so
great
and
stuff.
The stories behind the murder ballads are like really interesting too. So I think
it's great because students a lot of times coming to newish music for the first time are really struggling with the balance of creativity and accessibility and stretching things and keeping things familiar, and that piece really embraces the gamut of expression, where there are some parts of it that just feel almost like a regular text setting of an Appalachian ballad, and then there are other parts of it that feel like Peter Maxwell Davies, and it's a great way of just jamming all that stuff together in a tight space. It's so cool.
Amazing. I think Eight Blackbird will quote you on all of those things. It's like the best thing I've heard around the album yet.
I will blurb any album.
Yay!
So, Nathalie, thank you so much for being with us today. This has been really great. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, it's our pleasure. Tell us where people can go to keep up on everything that you've got going on and that Eighth Blackbird has going on.
Yes, definitely. Well, you can definitely follow Eight Blackbird all over social media. We're in a lot of places, so you definitely keep up with us. We're taking a lot of photos this season, especially because it's my first season. I really want to make sure that it's all being documented. So you can follow us on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, and we're at Eighth Blackbird in all of those places. And also, if you want to know if we're coming to a town near you, you can see our schedule on eightblackbird.com. And for me, you can just look for me online anywhere too. You can follow me at Flute Ronix and elsewhere. I don't know. I'm on Instagram too. I think it's just my first initial and my last name. I don't even know my Instagram handle. But more importantly, follow Eight Blackbird. But you'll be able to find me through that anyhow.
Well, we will have links to all of those things in our show notes at soundnotion.tv/SN. So thank you to everyone for listening to our conversation this afternoon. You'll find links to all the shows and all of the links to all the things that we talked about in all the shows across the SoundNotion network at soundnotion.tv. We've got this show, we've got our electronic music show Patch In, we've got our film music show Streamers and Punches, and all kinds of all the great shows. You can find us in iTunes and probably other places as well. I hope that we will be in the new Google Podcast-y thing when that comes available in the near future. So if you are a Google Podcast person, look for us there as well. If you are feeling generous, you should leave us a review in the iTunes store because that helps other new people find us. So that would be very nice of you. Thank you so much for listening, and we will catch you back next week. All right. Thank you very much, Nathalie.
Thank you.